Welcome to this explainer. Have you ever wondered how a single legal concept, actually, scratch that, a complete fiction could fundamentally shape the history, the land ownership, and the very foundation of an entire continent? Well, today we're diving into one of the most consequential and frankly legally intricate episodes in modern colonial history. We're talking about the British settlement of Australia and the doctrine of Terra Nullius. It's this absolutely fascinating look at how the law can literally shape reality, or in this case, completely deny it. Okay, so here's our roadmap for today. First, we'll look at the fiction of the empty land, and then we'll contrast that with the actual reality of a highly managed continent. From there, we'll explore the deliberate legal blindness of the British Crown, move right into the constitutional earthquake that was the Mabo decision, and finally, wrap up with the unfinished business of sovereignty today. All right, Section 1, the fiction of empty land and the 1788 arrival. So, picture this. The year is 1788, it's January, and the British First Fleet has just dropped anchor at Botany Bay. But to really grasp what happens next, we have to look at the legal baggage they brought with them. And that brings us to Terra Nullius. It's a Latin term, literally meaning land belonging to no one or empty land. Now, under the European law of nations at the time, a country could acquire sovereignty in a few ways: by conquest, by a treaty of cession, or by discovering Terra Nullius. What's so incredibly self-serving about this specific legal concept is how it played out here. By officially classifying Australia as empty land, the British Crown basically gave itself a free pass to claim an entire continent. No Indigenous consent, no treaties, and absolutely zero compensation. Moving on to Section 2, a managed continent, empirical reality. Now, here is where that neat little legal theory crashes headfirst into physical reality. Just think about this number, 65,000. Archaeological evidence firmly proves that Indigenous Australians have continuously occupied the continent for at least 65,000 years. That makes them literally one of the oldest continuous civilizations on Earth. So calling it an empty land? Yeah, that creates a massive, undeniable dissonance with the physical facts. To really understand how they lived, let's listen to this quote from anthropologist W.E.H. Stanner, who brilliantly captured the Indigenous relationship to the territory back in 1968. He wrote, "There was no sense of property in it of the Western kind, but there was a sense of being itself a property of the land." It's a profound idea, right? The crucial point here is that sure, Aboriginal peoples didn't use Western individualistic concepts of property, stuff you could just buy and sell, but they had a highly profound, systematic form of land tenure. Their entire identity, their law, and their morality, it was all deeply embedded in customary law, complex kinship systems, and very specific places. The physical evidence perfectly highlights the massive gap between that convenient colonial myth and the reality on the ground. The British legal assumption was basically nomadic wanderers in an unmanaged wilderness with no fixed property. But the archaeology shows something entirely different. We're talking about sophisticated fire stick farming, highly complex agricultural engineering, like the stone channels and eel traps built by the Gunditjmara people at Lake Conda, and elaborate fish traps along the Murray River. Plus, we see semi-permanent stone dwellings in the southeast, and strictly respected territorial boundaries. This wasn't some untouched wilderness, it was a densely occupied, highly managed continent. Which brings us to Section 3, a deliberate legal blindness. And this begs a really big bridging question, doesn't it? How on earth did this legal fiction survive when the physical evidence of people living there was so incredibly obvious to early explorers? Well, the answer is actually pretty cynical. European jurists simply lowered the bar. As historian Alan Atkinson points out, the law officers back in Britain knew full well that Australia wasn't empty. I mean, they literally had Captain James Cook's journals right in front of them, clearly describing numerous inhabitants. But they just decided that, hey, if the locals didn't practice European-style agriculture or have a recognizable European state structure, the land could legally be declared empty. Ultimately, Terra Nullius was a convenience. It was a handy loophole to avoid the incredibly messy, expensive business of treaty making. Let's walk through this timeline, because it shows just how entrenched this deliberate blindness became. Back in 1770, Cook implied the land was empty by claiming it without any negotiation. By 1788, the penal colony is established. Again, zero treaties. Jump ahead to 1832, and the colonial courts in the case of R.V. Boatman actively denied Aboriginal property rights, essentially ruling they had no law and no ownership. But then, look at 1835. a settler named John Batman actually tried to sign a treaty with Wurundjeri elders, offering blankets and tools for about 500,000 acres near modern-day Melbourne. And what happens? Governor Burke immediately voids it. Why? Because acknowledging even a single treaty would mean admitting the Crown didn't automatically own everything from day one. Which leads us to a really fascinating comparison. Over in North America and New Zealand, the British actually recognized pre-existing sovereignty. They negotiated treaties, like the famous 1840 Treaty of Waitangi. But in Australia, the Crown just completely pretended Aboriginal people didn't exist as a political community, creating this massive legal void. So why the anomaly? Well, timing was a huge factor. By the time treaties were even seriously considered in Australia in the 1830s, the so-called squatter interests had already seized vast tracts of land. Retroactively recognizing Indigenous title at that point would have literally collapsed colonial societies, so the law just chose to look away. All right, Section 4, the Mabo decision earthquake. Because after 200 years of the Terra Nullius doctrine going unchecked, the whole system was finally challenged by Eddie Koki Mabo and the Miriam people of the Torres Strait, a challenge that climaxed in 1992. And in 1992, the High Court of Australia delivered what was, for all intents and purposes, a constitutional earthquake. Just listen to this searing indictment from Justice Sir Gerard Brennan. The doctrine of Terra Nullius was a convenient legal fiction. To treat the fiction as a legal fact would be to deny the history of the Aboriginal people. I mean, wow. This was an unparalleled revolution in settler colonialism. You had the highest court in the land formally admitting that the nation's foundational property law was built on a complete lie. But, and this is a big but, we have to look closely at the limits of the Mabo decision. Yes, it repudiated Terra Nullius in property law, and yes, it recognized native title as a surviving right. However, it was a highly unstable compromise. It absolutely did not grant full Aboriginal sovereignty, and it didn't offer a dime in compensation for past dispossession. And perhaps most crucially, the court declared that the British Crown's acquisition of sovereignty itself cannot be questioned in an Australian court, period. So, while it was a breakthrough, native title remains a highly vulnerable right today, often buried in procedural hurdles and pretty easily extinguished by the government. And that takes us to our final section, Section 5, Sovereignty and Unfinished Business. Because once the High Court admitted the very foundation of the country was a fiction, well, it opened the floodgates to some urgent and fiercely contested contemporary debates. Today, the debate over how to move forward is incredibly complex. On one side, you have the argument for unceded sovereignty. A prime example of this is the 2017 Uluru Statement from the Heart, which argues that Indigenous spiritual sovereignty was never actually extinguished because no treaty was ever signed. This camp seeks structural mechanisms, like a constitutional voice to Parliament and a formal treaty. Now, on the exact opposite side, critics like Keith Windschuttle argue for equal property rights. From this viewpoint, the Mabo decision already fixed the historical error by giving Aboriginal people the exact same property rights as other Australians. These critics argue that pushing further for separate sovereignty or treaty rights just creates race-based divisions within a liberal democracy. As an analytical lens on that equal rights argument, historian Henry Reynolds offers a really specific counterpoint. He states, "Equality before the law is a fine principle, but it is not justice when one side started with everything and the other with nothing." What Reynolds is pointing out here is that relying purely on legal equality today kind of ignores the profoundly asymmetrical starting point. You can't just erase 200 years of the Terra Nullius doctrine, a massive period of dispossession without compensation that heavily skewed wealth and land ownership. So what should we really take away from all this? We're left with a truly profound and, I think, provocative question. How does a nation reconcile a legal foundation built on a fiction? Decades ago, anthropologist W.E.H. Stanner warned that until the reality of occupation is accepted, we live in a country built on a forgetting. The legal myth of Terra Nullius might have been formally struck down in court, but its political and social legacy remains one of the most pressing pieces of unfinished business today. It's a stark reminder that history isn't just a bunch of stuff that happened in the past. It is quite literally the ground we stand on right now.